Hi, I'm Dee Good with Shambhala Mountain Center, and I'm delighted to be here today with Hope Martin, who is a certified instructor of Alexander Technique, a meditation instructor, and a focusing trainer. Hope is also a close student of Pema Chodron, who has been a huge influence on Hope's work. And she's taught for many years at SMC every year. And we're delighted that she's going to be teaching an online program for us in November, the 12th through the 14th. So welcome, Hope. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So I'm curious, the workshop that you're teaching is called Embodied Listening. And what does that mean exactly? Or is it a communications thing, a body awareness thing, or both?
Well, I would say that it's both, but the main emphasis is not so much on communicate strategies for good communication, but a kind of deeply embodied approach that is about noticing one's own responses in relationship to another human being or any stimulus in your life, and learning to recognize how you're responding, not so much like your opinions, but sort of how that shows up in your body in the form of postural habits, tension patterns, and habitual ways of responding. And so learning to recognize that and then learning to shed the tension, to let go of a lot of bodily tension that often serves as kind of a protection to being fully present with what's happening, and learning to recognize on more subtle levels as well our responses to what's happening. So basically, my influences are the Alexander technique, which works a lot with how we hold ourselves, how we respond, as I said, to any given stimulus in a bodily way, our postural habits, and how we can recognize those habits and start to free up and let the earth support us and let go of a lot of tension and holding, and basically just become more easier in ourselves. So that's one of the main influences in embodied listening. The other is meditation practice, which is a training in being present and coming back to the present moment over and over again. So in this workshop, I will be giving meditation instruction for those who have never had it. And the instruction I give is actually pretty body based. And so we'll be looking at, through that practice, we'll be recognizing some of the ways that we hold or try hard to be upright, and learn to let go of that and let the ground support us. And again, let go of a lot of tension and holding in our system.
Mm.
And then the other influence of embodied listening, the other aspect, is a practice called focusing. And focusing is a lot about connecting to your bodily response, called a felt sense, to what's happening with you. So the felt sense is always operating, but we don't always notice it. So it's a kind of subtle holding pattern that is palpable, but can also feel vague or unclear. And so in this practice, and this is actually, the focusing is really almost the main practice of embodied listening, is learning to be present to those bodily sensations,
Mhm.
because in the holding pattern is often a lot of um, wisdom or understanding about something in your life. So what I would say is the embodied listening is a we're working with these three practices to come back to the present moment, to shed protective physical holding patterns in the form of tension, to learn to let go of that, and then to access deeper feelings held in the body. So, an example of a felt sense might be when you say, "Oh, I have a lump in my throat." That's just an example, right? So, that lump in your throat isn't arbitrary, it's about something, right? It's about some way your body is holding experience. Maybe you feel touched by something, or you feel sad, or there's some poignancy that you're experiencing, and it's in that form.
It's
Do you
right
see
in
what I'm
there.
saying? So, yeah,
Mhm.
so that's a felt sense showing up in your body. There's lots of other examples of felt senses. Even when you leave your house and you have this feeling that you forgot something. You don't know what it is, but there's a sense, oh, did I forget my wallet, or did I forget my keys? You don't yet know what it is, but you have a sense of that.
Mhm.
That's also a felt sense. It's kind of what I'm teaching is really a kind of embodied presence
Mhm.
that allows you to be with your responses, to process your responses, to get out of the constantly churning thinking and conceptual mind and settle into the body in a much more direct way where experience is held. Where so that's really a lot of what we're doing in the embodied listening workshop is learning to contact that.
Mhm.
And there's also an emphasis on being very, very gentle and kind to yourself, and start to develop a better relationship with our responses. Because so often we're critical, or maybe we feel ashamed that we blurted something out, or we have problems in our relationships or challenges in our lives. And we're not often very kind to ourselves around that sort of thing. You know, we feel we could be doing better, or somehow we're not living up to some promise,
Mhm.
something. And so this is a lot about really being with our responses and learning to kind of respect them, but also learning to not always move into habitual behavior.
I'm curious about for people who've had traumatic events in their lives, does that come up, or does that lead to a holding pattern that you might eventually recognize and
Yeah.
release?
Yes, all of that lives in the body. And I want to say that in the workshops I lead, sometimes that does come up for people, like touching in on something that they recognize it's a trauma response. And there are resources in the workshop for that. So the idea is to not go too fast or to back off of that. And also, there's a lot of emphasis on the body being a cradle of loving kindness for whatever it is we're going through, which is sort of shifting the whole relationship of ourselves to our bodies. Because very often, you know, we have there are cultural ideals about what a body should look like, or and so we have sort of grown up with a lot of battling with our bodies in some ways. And this is really learning to settle into your body, and whatever you're going through in your life, or even a trauma response, learning to let the whole, to experience it in the context of the whole body, supported by the earth and supported by the environment. So there's a sense that we're not diving into these responses, we're not narrowing into them. They're there, but they're in the context of a safe container, the container of your whole body. And during the workshop, we were working with really cultivating that as a loving, kind container for us to experience our responses from.
That's
I did also want to say that so often we tend to merge. Like if we have a strong emotion, we don't have any distance from it. We just kind of dive into it and it takes over, right? So the sense of coming back to the present moment, slowing down through meditation and the embodiment practices I'm teaching, sensing the whole body and learning to let the ground support us, which means we're letting go of tension in that process. And learning to relate with the whole environment gives a large context for our responses to be in relationship to them rather than merged with them. And that gives us the resources to be much more skillful in our response to others. Because so often we get very reactive. We don't really like what's going on, and we start to, bounce off another person in an unproductive way, right? And so this is really being much more in your own skin and noticing those responses arise, but learning to not always go into them.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, so how did you come to do this work?
Well, I found the Alexander technique in my early 20s. And looking back on it, I was really a veteran of my um, family life, which was, I had a lot of blessings in my life, but I also had a highly dysfunctional family, like many of us, I should say. And some real difficulty, some trauma in my own family that I was living with. And so it was auspicious coincidence. I found the Alexander technique, which really helped me settle into my own skin. And I felt so much freedom from the practice because the practice is really a lot about recognizing those constricting patterns, but learning to really free them up. And so I just had these wonderful experiences after an Alexander lesson of just feeling so freed up and so joyous from letting go of a lot of tension and holding.
Mhm.
And then some years after that, I found meditation practice. But I realized for myself, I would not have been able to meditate without the body piece because I had a lot of some anxiety and a lot of fidgetiness, and I needed to really settle into my body, which helped my meditation practice a lot. So then I embarked on, meditation practice in a serious way and also the Buddhist teachings. And that helped me so much. And then later on, through David Rowe, my co-teacher, I found focusing, which is such an interesting practice because it's a lot about having a very respectful relationship with your own responses and being kind of bearing witness to them, these subtle, unclear body holding patterns that we're calling the felt sense, and learning to be in relationship to them and allowing them to feel safe enough to come forward and reveal themselves. And in that way, uh, the meaning in the holding pattern starts to un- appear, it starts to show up. And so you get like so much meaning about a certain situation that's a challenge. And so often we go about trying to correct those challenges or work them out in very, very habitual ways that doesn't help them move. And the focusing practice is really seeing the wisdom in the holding pattern. There's a reason it's there and it wants to speak to us, but we don't know how to listen to it. And the embodied listening training goes into that. How do you actually relate with these, habitual places that it's almost like a little kid who wants your attention and you just keep going, go to your room. And they just start screaming louder, right? But it's learning to actually pay attention to these ways that we hold experience that are kind of vague but full of meaning. And when that felt sense, when the holding pattern feels met, it will also often unravel or move forward and reveal what needs to happen next for our lives. So in the embodied listening workshop, in that part of the workshop, we work with partners. And the partner learns how to support the person in the focusing role who's speaking and exploring these places. So this is another aspect of a communication thing. Yes, it's a body awareness thing, embodied listening, but the communication piece is learning to support another person in their own process. Does that make sense?
It
In a
does.
partnership. Yeah, in
Yeah.
a partnership.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And so people will be doing some partner work and some whole group work. And what else can people expect from this weekend program?
So we'll be meditating, and then I will be teaching some experiential anatomy so that you start to understand your structures more and learn to work with habitual postural patterns. For instance, I'm going to try to demonstrate, um, the good old fashioned slump. I don't know if you can see me very well, but here we go. Where the tendencies to pull down and hold tension. And what we discover through the process is that this kind of pattern, there's not a lot of movement happening internally. And there's not a lot of space for me in this. Do you see what I mean? Like I'm really pulled down. I have compromised breathing. There's a heaviness to it. There's not a lot of interest in the environment at all. It's all imploded, right? And it's hard to access my own responses this way. There's a lot of shutdown in this, right? So through the workshop, you'll learn to have a balanced upright, but it's very indirect because when we think of upright, so Dee, for you, when you think of upright, what do you tend to do in your, like, when you try to have good posture, how do you approach that?
I will, try and pull my shoulders back so that, to kind of counteract that chest protection, heart protection. And so it's, something like this that I can't sustain. I won't be able to
Right,
hold it because it's not, it's too strained and it's
right.
not.
So then, yeah, so you can't sustain it because it's too strained, right?
Mhm.
So exactly. And so we'll be learning how to not always have those kind of responses to the pattern that we're in, right? So, and actually, Alexander had a wonderful phrase, which I'll use now. He called the tendency to correct like that, to push out of your pattern into another pattern. Um, he called it end gaining, GAIN, as in Nancy. So his language is old fashioned because he was out of the Victorian era, but what he's getting at is we're always trying to gain an end. We're always trying to correct or improve upon something, right? And so that's an example of trying to improve upon a habitual pattern that you recognize you want to change by using too much effort and end gaining. And the end result is tension, holding, lack of breath, and something that you can't sustain because it's uncomfortable. So basically in one part of this workshop you will be learning to find a balanced upright that isn't about reacting to your pattern, but based on the intelligence of your anatomy and learning a little bit about that. So in the end, instead of the slumpy pattern or the overworking pattern, you'll find a balanced pattern that allows the transfer of weight to move through your skeletal structure, past your sit bones into the earth, so that there's breath and internal movement in it and more access to you. to any of us, more access to our responses, more access to our well-being. And also in that balanced body state, there's more accommodation for our responses. And that's really what I'm trying to say. Instead of trying to change ourselves or work at change, we learn to accommodate, make room for, accept, give space to these responses that we find kind of problematic in ourselves, or outside stimulus that we have a hard time with, right? So we learn to come into a more balanced body state and process our responses from that place rather than reacting and pushing out. Okay, so that's one thing that we'll be working with. And I also teach a lying down practice called constructive rest that we then bring to upright. And that really helps with finding this balance I'm talking about. By the end of the weekend, every participant should know much more about having more sense of balance and ease and recognizing habitual patterns of interference that get in the way of this innate sense of expansion and ease that is really our birthright. We really know about it. It's in our systems, but we interfere with it through our habits. And then we'll also be doing the focusing work.
Right. And
in partners, I'll be teaching the focusing work and the theory of focusing, and then we'll get into partnerships, and we should have, a good amount of time to practice it together and ask questions. Did you have a question?
I was curious about how this works online. I mean, I could see how in a room, you could work with people and, it's easier to see and work with people's bodies when you're in the same room. How does it work online?
Well, actually, it really works well online. I've been since COVID started, I've been doing quite a lot of online teaching. Traditionally, Alexander technique is taught with touch, hands-on work, but I've been teaching for 35 years and I really know a lot about clear verbalization with anatomical support, like teaching you about your head-neck relationship and how the head really balances at the height of the top of the spine, and the spine and the sit bones, and then going onto the ground and coming upright. And you can really learn it online. I also look at individual patterns, so I'll work with the participants individually in the context of the group so we can learn together. So I'll do demonstrations that way. And, it's true, the touch is wonderful. But one thing I have learned, and I've gotten a lot of feedback about this from my students that I've worked with online and who've also worked with me with hands-on in person, is that they say they have more autonomy with the process online, learning it this way, because they're not relying on the touch to give them an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it really does work, actually. I didn't necessarily think it would work so well, but it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good to
Yeah.
know, since
Yeah.
that's the way we have to work these days.
Yeah. And it's, as I said, there's advantages to it and disadvantages, but it really does work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm excited about the program and hope to have you back at SMC in the flesh soon.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I want to get back there. I love that place. I actually want to say one other thing about how this relates to good communication.
Please.
So what I'm suggesting is that all of this learning to be with our own responses and learn to accommodate them ourselves, give them room, give them space, and then be in relationship to more subtle holding patterns in the body that have meaning, that are there for a reason. If we can do that for ourselves and learn to not skitter away because we find something uncomfortable or vague, or we're not sure, we can't really handle being in an unknown place. Through this workshop, you'll learn to really be more, you'll have practice in being with a more unknown place that we don't really totally understand it. And we might not want to touch it, but you just let it be there. And so, this is what I'm trying to say. Learning to do that for ourselves, learning to make a friendly relationship with our own responses and places in ourselves that we've avoided for whatever reason, is really the foundation of good communication with others. Because we find others trigger us. Not always, we love our friends, we love our families, but, we can be highly triggered by other people. And when we're triggered, we're having a response that we can take care of, that we can make space for, that we can find out about. We don't have to get rid of it. We don't have to shunt it aside. We can actually let it be there and let ourselves process it in a kind of larger context than trying to figure it out. And this is very good for learning good communication with others. It's often said, an analogy for how you would be with the felt sense is if you're walking in the woods and you hear an animal, you hear some noise, or you see a bird, or you see a fox or something. How would you have to be in yourself so that that animal didn't run away? What would you have to do so that you didn't scare that animal off? Right?
Mhm.
And so learning to, let these responses, give them space to express themselves, is also training in communicating with others. Even if we don't agree with them, or we find their opinions abhorrent, or they don't have the same political views, etc., etc., learning to take care of those responses in us and be curious about them. What would we have to do to not provoke some communication that we might think of as unskillful?
Mhm.
Yeah, so to bring something out in them that's about their humanity and what's meaningful for them. So that's what I have to say. What is the relationship between doing this internal work and having good communication with others?
So it sounds like it's not only just for ourselves, but it's actually a gift to those that we're in relationship with, to be able to be in our bodies skillfully and in a way that's responsive to the world.
Yes, absolutely. And that is not all shut down. This kind of thing where we're just circulating our state of mind over and over again and we don't get freedom from it. Learning to come upright, shedding the tension patterns, giving our responses space, and seeing the world around us, seeing other people, connecting with that. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Hope, for giving us a sense of this embodied listening program. And we hope folks will join us
Oh,
online.
yeah. It's so rich. I love this work. And I really hope that this conversation uh, made sense to others, It's a little hard to talk about this experiential stuff, but well worth the effort, I think. Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Dee. Really appreciate uh, the conversation with you.